From NBC News in Washington, the world's longest-running television program, this is Meet the Press with David Gray.
Good Sunday morning, a busy one. We've got breaking news here that we are following this morning. NSA leaker Edward Snowden is on the move. He has left Hong Kong. He boarded a commercial flight to Moscow a few hours ago. Final destination unknown, but he is expected to land in Moscow in just a few minutes. The Hong Kong government issued a defiant statement claiming the U.S. extradition request did not fully comply with Hong Kong law. And WikiLeaks posted a statement just moments ago saying Snowden is, quote, bound for a democratic nation via a safe route for the purposes of asylum and is being escorted by diplomats and legal advisors from WikiLeaks. That organization, as you know, responsible for other high-profile leaks of classified information. All of this as the U.S. has charged Snowden with espionage and the theft of government property and has made clear that they intend for him to face justice here in the United States. Many questions remain. We want to talk to the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, who is with us exclusively this morning, in just a moment. But first, I want to bring in the man who actually broke the NSA surveillance story for the Guardian newspaper, columnist Glenn Greenwald. He's got additional information this morning. Glenn is in Brazil this morning, and I should point out there's a very big delay between us on the satellite, so I want to be mindful of that. And Glenn, so as I begin this morning, tell us where Snowden is, where he is ultimately headed.
Well, I think the where he is question is one that you just answered, which is he's on a commercial flight to Moscow. Where he's ultimately headed is unknown. In every conversation that I've had with him over the last 3 weeks, he has stressed that the key context for every decision that he's making is, as McClatchy reported this morning, the Obama administration has been engaged in an unprecedented war against whistleblowers, people who bring transparency to what they're doing. And he believes that it's vital that he stay out of the clutches of the U.S. government because of the record of the Obama administration on people who disclose wrongdoing that the political officials are doing in the dark. And he apparently is headed to a democratic country that will grant him asylum from this persecution.
So he does not intend to return to the United States. He intends to fight extradition. What else does he intend to do? You have been in contact with him. Is there additional information he is prepared to leak to bolster his and your claim that he is actually a whistleblower and not a criminal responsible for espionage?
Sure. I think the key definition of whistleblower is somebody who brings to light what political officials do in the dark that is either deceitful or illegal. And in this case, there's a New York Times article just this morning that describes that one of the revelations that he enabled, that we reported, is that the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, went before the U.S. Congress and lied outright when asked whether or not the NSA is collecting any form of data on millions of Americans. His response, Director Clapper's response, was, no, sir. As the New York Times said today, even Clapper has had to say that that statement was absolutely false. And the very first conversation I ever had with Mr. Snowden, he showed me the folder in which he had placed the documents and labeled it NSA lying to Congress that proved, as we reported, that the NSA is bulk collecting the phone records of millions of Americans indiscriminately, exactly what Clapper denied to the Congress was being done. As for illegality, the New York Times also said today that the bulk spying program exceeds the Patriot Act, and there's a FISA court opinion that says that the U.S. government, that the NSA, engaged in unconstitutional and illegal spying on American citizens. That court opinion is secret, but he showed me documents discussing internally in the NSA what that court ruling is, and that should absolutely be public.
With regard to that specific FISA opinion, isn't the case, based on people that I've talked to, that the FISA opinion, based on the government's request, is that they said, well, you can get this, but you can't get that. That would actually go beyond the scope of what you're allowed to do, which means that the request was changed or denied, which is the whole point the government makes, which is that there is actual judicial review here and not abuse. Isn't this the kind of review and opinion that you would want to keep these programs in line?
I don't know what government officials are whispering to you, David, but I know that the documents that I have in my possession and that I have read from the NSA tell a much different story, which is that there was an 80-page opinion from the FISA court that said that what the NSA is doing in spying on American citizens is a violation of both the Fourth Amendment and the bounds of the statute. And it specifically said that they are collecting bulk transmissions, multiple conversations from millions of Americans, not just people that are believed to be involved in terrorist organizations or working for a foreign agent, and that this is illegal. And the NSA then planned to try and accommodate that ruling. But I think the real issue as journalists and as citizens is, why should we have to guess? How can we have a democracy in which a secret court rules that what the government is doing in spying on us is a violation of the Constitution and the law, and yet we sit here and don't know what that ruling is because it's all been concealed and all been secret? I think we need to have transparency and disclosure, and that's why Mr. Snowden stepped forward so that we could have that.
There are reports that he's ultimately headed to Venezuela. Is that your understanding?
I'm not going to talk about where he's headed or what his plans are. I think it's up in the air. I'm not actually sure where he's headed, and he's my source for these stories. I'm not going to talk about where I think he's going.
Well, that would meet the criteria for what he's outlining, what you've outlined this morning in terms of where he'd like to be.
Right. Well, Venezuela has a democratically elected government, though it has lots of problems in its political system. And I think the real question is, why should an American citizen who joined the U.S. military, worked for the CIA, worked for the NSA, why does he feel that he has to flee the United States simply because he steps forward in a very careful way, goes to newspapers, reveals wrongdoing and lying on the part of U.S. government officials? Why does he feel that he has to flee? And the McClatchy article this morning answers that question. It says the Obama administration has been unprecedentedly aggressive and vindictive in how it punishes and treats whistleblowers as enemies of the state. And I think that's really the question we need to be asking, is why are whistleblowers being treated in this fashion?
You are a polemicist here. You have a point of view. You are a columnist. You're also a lawyer. You do not dispute that Edward Snowden has broken the law, do you?
No, I think he's very clear about the fact that he did it because his conscience compelled him to do so, just like Daniel Ellsberg did 50 years ago when he released the Pentagon Papers and also admits that he broke the law. I think the question, though, is how can he be charged with espionage? He didn't work for a foreign government. He could have sold this information for millions of dollars and enriched himself. He didn't do any of that either. He stepped forward, and as we want people to do in a democracy, as a government official, learned of wrongdoing and exposed it so we could have a democratic debate about the spying system. Do we really want to put people like that in prison for life when all they're doing is telling us as citizens what our political officials are doing in the dark?
Final question for you, but I'd like you to hang around. I just want to get Pete Williams in here as well. To the extent that you have aided and abetted Snowden, even in his current movements, why shouldn't you, Mr. Greenwald, be charged with a crime?
I think it's pretty extraordinary that anybody who would call themselves a journalist would publicly muse about whether or not other journalists should be charged with felonies. The assumption in your question, David, is completely without evidence, the idea that I've aided and abetted him in any way. The scandal that arose in Washington before our stories began was about the fact that the Obama administration is trying to criminalize investigative journalism by going through the emails and phone records of AP reporters, accusing a Fox News journalist of the theory that you just embraced, being a co-conspirator with felonies for working with sources. If you want to embrace that theory, it means that every investigative journalist in the United States who works with their sources, who receives classified information, is a criminal. And it's precisely those theories and precisely that climate that has become so menacing in the United States. It's why the New Yorker's Jane Mayer said investigative reporting has come to a standstill, her word, as a result of the theories that you just referenced.
Well, the question of who's a journalist may be up to a debate with regard to what you're doing. And, of course, anybody who's watching this understands I was asking a question. That question has been raised by lawmakers as well. I'm not embracing anything, but obviously, I take your point. Mr. Greenwald, just stay put, if you would, for just a moment. I want to bring in Pete Williams. I appreciate you dealing with the delay as well. Pete, can you just bring me up to speed on where the Justice Department is on this? What is it they're prepared to do now that Snowden has done what he's done?
Well, the request for extradition will follow wherever he ends up. What I'm told is, first of all, we know that the charges were filed actually under seal a week ago in the Eastern District of Virginia, right across the river from Washington. And the Hong Kong government was informed of that, and the U.S. sought the next step, which is an arrest warrant. And then after he was arrested, the extradition process would start. Administration officials say that the Hong Kong officials came back to the U.S. just this past Friday night with additional questions that the U.S. was in the process of responding when the Hong Kong authorities notified the U.S. that they decided to let him go. Now, in their statement, the Hong Kong government says that the charges the U.S. filed, quote, did not fully comply with the legal requirements under Hong Kong law. I think it's fair to say that the U.S. is upset about this because it's the administration's claim that the filing of the charges was a back and forth with the Hong Kong authorities, that they wanted to make sure that they would conform to the treaty, the extradition treaty the U.S. has, and that they'd received assurances that it would. So this is quite a surprise, I think it's fair to say, the administration. But, David, I think from now on, this is a diplomatic issue, not a legal one, because it's quite obvious he intends to seek asylum, and that's where this process goes next.
What are the lengths to which the administration may be prepared to go? I'm not asking you to speculate, but what are going to be some of the menu of choices that they're going to have to be discussing?
Well, the only ones I know are the diplomatic and legal ones. Whether there are more exotic ones to sort of grab him and bring him back, I wouldn't know, and of course they wouldn't say. That would obviously be very controversial, although I'm sure there are many members of Congress who would agree and others who would think that it was the wrong thing to do. But as far as I know, this is strictly a legal and diplomatic one. Obviously, I mean, I suppose if that was going to be the course, the U.S. had the chance to do that when he was in Hong Kong and chose not to.
All right, Pete, thank you so much. One last question for Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, I just would like you, if you would, to respond to your critics, who, as you know, have made a case against you, against Snowden, saying, look, this is not a case of a courageous whistleblower who worked through the system, even available to whistleblowers, to report if something that you may think is abuse. This is a partisan who is single-handedly deciding to expose programs that there is both support for, and in doing so illegally, that this is more of an agenda, and that there's frankly a lot of concern that one person would take it upon himself to undermine a program that a lot of people believe is actually helpful to national security.
Right. This is what the U.S. government, the claim that you just referenced, has been saying for decades. As I said, they said the same thing about Daniel Ellsberg. They said the same thing about whoever leaked the Bush NSA eavesdropping program to the New York Times in 2005, or who told the Washington Post, Dana Priest, about CIA black sites. This is how the government always tries to protect themselves from transparency, is by accusing those who bring it of endangering national security. There's been nothing that has been revealed that has been remotely endangering of national security. The only people who have learned anything are the American people, who have learned the spying apparatus is directed at them. But let me just quickly say, it isn't Edward Snowden who's making the decisions about what is published. He didn't just simply upload these documents to the internet or pass them to adversary governments, which is what he could have done had he been inclined or had his motive been to harm the United States. He came to two newspapers, The Guardian and The Washington Post, and said, I want you to be extremely careful about what it is that you publish and what it is that you don't publish. Only publish what Americans should know, but don't harm national security. And we have withheld the majority of things that he gave us, pursuant not only to his instruction, but to our duty as journalists. That's what whistleblowers and journalists do every single day, David. That's how Americans have learned about wrongdoing on the part of the U.S. government, through this process.
All right, Glenn Greenwald, I really appreciate you coming on this morning and for your views. Thank you very much.